Welcome back to the Gen Z Speaks podcast. With us today, a very special guest as always, Kamy Akhavan, who is the director of the USC Center for Political Future, CPF. Full disclosure, I used to work for Kamy. He's been honestly one of the best bosses I've ever had. He was also the former CEO of procon.org, which was, it still is, a leading nonpartisan source of research. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Great pleasure. Good to see you again, my friend. You were one of the best employees ever.
No,
You don't have to lie to him.
you don't have to make me feel good about myself. No, I really mean it. I think you were a really good boss. We've talked about this on the podcast in terms of what makes good leaders. You always listened. I noticed this. Like, you always got to know every single student worker at the office, and you just hung out with us as people. And not a lot of bosses go out of their way to get to know the backstory of their employees. And because you did that, I feel like I have this connection with you that I don't have with some of the other bosses. So I appreciate that.
You're so welcome, man. I'm genuinely curious about you. I was always so impressed with you. So it was a pleasure for me to be back in touch, back in connection, and talking about some important stuff.
Yes, sir. I want to start. We'll delve into. You're an expert on political polarization. We'll delve into that.
Sure.
But I'm just curious, what made you involved in politics? Like, what's your backstory of
All
how you
right.
got involved?
I'm gonna answer your question, but let me do something first because I watched this show. I listened to this podcast.
Okay.
Guys, your background looks like we're in a college dormitory, so I'm gonna jazz it up a little bit. I brought you a little gift.
Oh,
We can
wow.
put it
Thank
right
you.
there in the
Thank
corner.
Wow,
Bring
thank
a
you
little
very
bit of
much.
life and
There we
greenery
go.
to
Next
the
to Obama.
to the set. And then we also brought some notebooks for you. I know
Oh,
thank
sweet.
you.
Very much.
your
Thank you.
generation does more texting than writing, but when you need to write something, now you got a notebook to write.
Thank
write
you,
it
sir.
in.
This is
Appreciate
incredible.
that.
You know,
Yeah.
can I? This is a historic moment on the podcast. You're the first guest who's
Yeah.
ever given us a gift.
Hey,
first guest
all
with a
right.
gift.
All
Wow,
right,
this
all right,
is
all right.
incredible.
That's
Thank you so
awesome.
much.
Thank
I
you so much.
appreciate it.
Appreciate
Of course,
that.
you're
Yeah.
very welcome. I'm a fan, so this is a treat for me. But to answer your question, what
Yeah.
gets people interested in politics? Politics is about community, and it's also about circumstance. That's how I see it. So, where does politics begin? If you really think about it, politics begin as soon as you have a conscience and you're aware of your community, you're aware of the challenges that your parents have, you're aware of the challenges that you have as a young person, you become more aware of your identity or identities. But I know what you're asking. So to answer your question, for me, it started in high school, and I went to a speech and debate organization at my high school called the Junior State of America. And I was there because some of my friends were going to it as well. And they would have debates with one another. And I didn't care about debating. I didn't care about speech. I didn't really care about politics. I was on the one track to law school. That's all I was thinking about. But I went to this meeting anyways, and I was so interested in what these folks were talking about. And at the time, they were having a debate about the death penalty. And I thought, I for sure know what I think about the death penalty. And then I left that meeting thinking, man, maybe I don't know if I got this all right. You know, maybe there's more to the story. There's more that I hadn't considered. And it really it got my brain excited. And I thought, this is really fun. And then I went to another meeting, and they were doing other debates, and I saw how back and forth it was. And you have to be a good listener if you want to be a good debater, because you got to be able to counter their arguments, right? And you had to know the research, and you had to think on your feet, and you had to be a good speaker. And I was none of those things. But after going to a few meetings and practicing a little bit, my confidence started to get up, and I started to talk a little bit more. And honestly, that speech and debate, that club experience completely changed my life. You know, if I put up my hand one day and said, I'm going to be president of this organization, and I was for the next couple of years, grew the chapter to 120 students, which for a college or high school campus, that's a pretty big size. Club. Anyway, all that's to say, it got me really interested in issues, really interested in politics, and that journey has never stopped since then.
That's
Interesting.
amazing. Yeah.
What did you notice about the students when you were in high school, about the way they debated? Did you see any patterns that you still see
That's a good
today?
question.
No, the patterns are the same. You know, at some point, some people will take arguments personally, and then when that happens, then it's more about shouting, and it's more about using personal attacks, maybe cursing, maybe using insults. You're an idiot. How could you think that way? That's so wrong. That sort of thing. So That still happens today.
Yeah.
But I got to say that one of the pluses of any debate program is they create guardrails so that those conversations have some structure to it. So you get 2 minutes to make your case and say whatever the heck you want. But when your 2 minutes are up, that person gets to say whatever the heck they want. And their points might be better than yours. And it didn't matter if you shouted yours or you feel really strongly about it. If their arguments are better, they say it in a better way, your side, the thing you were passionate about, that side might look foolish to the audience who's listening. So if you really want to be persuasive, you have to up your game and you have to be more persuasive, have better facts and information, be a better presenter, be a better listener, anticipate what your opponent might say so that you can counter it before they even bring up the point. So it taught all of these kinds of skills. And the thing that honestly is really one of the best things about debate, and then I'll stop going on about debate, but you don't know what side of the debate you're going to be on. So you might feel very strongly about that there should be no death penalty. Of course, there should not be a death penalty, and all these reasons for it. But the day of that debate, you might get assigned to the other side, and you have to argue for it. Like, now what do I do?
Yeah.
So it's all about being able to take another person's perspective, have those kind of arguments at the ready, right? So you really have to understand it. And just being able to understand anybody's perspective with that level of depth, because you genuinely need to know it to be persuasive, getting in somebody's head, really understanding another viewpoint. That skill to me is the skill of empathy. It's the skill of gaining perspective in life. And it's a thing that can really help people have those aha moments for themselves. Like, I never thought of it that way. It sure was for me. It was for me, being forced to take the opposing side of things that I cared about. So anyway, that's why I love programs like this, where you challenge people to consider different kinds of points of view, to think about things from perspectives that are different than their own, so we can sort of grow and learn as human beings. So if I thought the same way I thought when I was in high school, I mean, what kind of life is that, right? You want to keep growing and learning and developing and being curious and adjusting, and that's, we got to be open to that experience, because that's the point.
So you think being open and taking on the opposing point of view helps you mature in a way, so you don't have to, because we see this all the time, even in current politics, right? People attack, and then straw mans are thrown all over the place, and it's like, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of maturity there. So how do you think how do we combat that?
I mean, it's a tough question. Tough question to answer for sure. But it comes down to, what is your motivation? So if your goal is to win, then you can present the straw man arguments. You can just try to obliterate the opponent, and you can try to outmaneuver them. And it doesn't really matter what they say, because your goal is to win. If your goal is to understand, which I'd say if you go in with that mindset into any conversation, it just completely changes the dynamic. Completely. You're curious. You're like, why do you think that? How long have you held that point of view? What makes you think that way? There's something about the way that you grew up that led you to believe that. And you really want to get inside their head, and then you realize that their perspective might not be so weird after all. Maybe there's something to it. Maybe it's just because of how they were raised. Maybe it's because of their socioeconomic conditions, or maybe their parents had a certain viewpoint that was imparted on them, and they're going through a growth period themselves. Like, there's a lot that goes into a person's viewpoint, and we don't know until we get curious.
That's right.
And sometimes the person with the opinion, they don't know. Until you start asking questions, and it gets them to
question it.
To question it, exactly. Yeah.
We had we haven't released a podcast yet, but we had an older. He's actually a professor at USC.
What's on him? Scott Soames.
Scott Soames. Yeah. So we had him on, and he said something. He said that back when he was younger, in the 70s and 80s, even 60s, 70s, 80s, he said that the political polarization that's happening right now, he said, I didn't see any of that. There was no Democrat, there was no Republican. It was just what we think is going to suit the states better, right? And that's a very mature way of looking at things. And now I feel like it's a type of degrade, like we've degraded in a way to attacking each other and doing that type of stuff, right? So have you seen like a pivotal point in history that was like, okay, this is why it's come to this point?
Yes, and not just one thing.
Okay.
Dozens of things that have been happening.
All added up.
All adding up.
Gotcha.
And it's, You study finance, you know the compound effect, all these things that happen, and they build on each other, build on each other. We are as divided as we have ever been by some measures for two basic reasons. The things that used to bring people together, the unifiers are disappearing en masse, and we can talk about what that means. That's part of it. The other part of it is the things that divide us are accelerating on steroids, right? They're accelerating dramatically, and so the things that keep us together, if those go away and the dividers are accelerating, then look what happens, right? We are where we are, and like I said, this preceded Trump. Trump is gasoline on a fire of this polarization for sure. He's not the unifier in chief, but I mean, very few people in national politics are anymore because they're more reflective of the kind of values that many Americans hold, where we really are more tribal in our instincts. And if you're not on my team, well, then you're the enemy. And if someone is the enemy, what do you do with enemies? You do everything you can to stop the enemy. You don't say, hey, enemy, come over for dinner. No, you say, enemy, you are justified in doing anything you can. So this, to your point, like the mentality of I'm right, you're wrong, give me that any day. That's the American way, right? We're supposed to disagree with each other. We're supposed to
have discourse.
Right? But as soon as it becomes I'm right, you're evil, that just changes the dynamic, and that's called affective polarization. And that form of polarization is at an all-time high right now.
For those listeners wondering, can you define polarization for us?
The real answer is no, because polarization in a lot of ways is an internalized term, but I'll tell you how I think about it. So when I think about polarization, I'm thinking about affective polarization. I'm thinking about the I'm right, you're evil, that your viewpoint is not only wrong, but your viewpoint must be silenced, stopped, and combated because it is wrong. And it is not just I think your argument is weak. It's I have a moral judgment that goes against the viewpoint that you're espousing, and I think it's lesser than mine, and that I don't want to associate with you because of that belief. That belief, because you hold that one belief, you might hold 100 others, but because you hold that one belief, now you're on the other side of a line from me, right? And so it's your virtues, your values are in opposition to mine because of that. So that's what I meant by polarization. So I'll give you an example. So in Congress, there used to be something called a liberal Republican, and that is a Republican who believed in, say, abortion rights. And there might be something that was a conservative Democrat. That might be a Democrat who was strongly in favor of, say, foreign military interventions, right? And nowadays in our Congress, you can't find a Republican who is in favor of abortion rights. Those liberal Republicans are basically gone. And you look at the Democrats who are very hawkish on military, or Democrats who are the blue dog Democrats, conservative Democrats, they're basically gone. The parties have become very polarized. They've become farther to the ideological extremes. And so it's harder for them to connect with one another. And you can see that in terms of when one member let's say a Democrat introduces a bill into Congress, who does the support for that bill come from? Not the other party. It comes from their own party, right? So that sort of being unable to support another party's legislation is becoming and has become the norm. It used to be fairly common. You're like, yeah, I support what you're doing. I support infrastructure. I support, but now it's rare to find that sort of cross-party support.
Yeah, I asked that question because that's how I perceive a polarization as well. Like when two sides of a political aisle are going into the extremes, and that's being adopted by the majority of the people. I mean, in terms of the dictionary definition, I just want to pull it up. I have it in my notes. Merriam-Webster defines political polarization as this, and I think you might disagree with this definition, but nonetheless, I think it's important to note it down. Let me just have it here. So basically, this is what the definition says: a state in which the opinions, beliefs, or interests of a group or society no longer range along a continuum but become concentrated at opposing extremes. But wouldn't you say this has existed in America ever since our founding? Like, we were always divided ideologically. Sure, we weren't polarized to the degree that we are now, but we always had like division in our country. There hasn't really been a point in time where everybody really believed in everything, you know?
Sure. Yeah. I sure don't think that has ever existed in this country or any
Yeah,
country,
right.
you know, and it'd be dangerous if it was. That's homogenous
Yeah.
thinking. We don't need that. We don't want that. And that has never been the American way. Listen, division is normal. Division is good. Healthy disagreement
Yes.
is fundamental
Mhm.
to growth. We need tension to grow.
Hmm.
You guys are fit. We know when you want to build up your muscles, you lift something heavy because it's hard. We need to do those hard things. We need conflict. We need tension in order to grow. And that's how it works in our political systems as well. But what's happening now is that this tension has become so great that the weight is unliftable, and that the things that we need to achieve as a country, let's look at immigration reform. What was the last meaningful immigration reform that was passed? 1986. What is it now? 2024. How is it that we are so incapable of passing reforms along things where in some cases most Americans agree?
Yeah.
You know, but why is that? It's because of polarization. It's because you don't want the other side to win. You don't want to give them a victory, and you're going to really go to the extremes and do everything you can to prevent basic things from happening because it means that your side is being threatened.
Yeah. I think a lot of politicians are viewing these fights as a war. In a war, there's one side that wins and the other that loses. And like you said, they're seeing people as enemies rather than citizens. When you do that, you can't see the humanity in the other person, because your job at war, if you're in actual battle like combat, is
Mhm.
to kill the other person.
That's right.
Literally. And I think we're intellectually killing our fellow citizens by not, that might sound extreme, but I really believe that we're killing the other person intellectually because we're refusing to see that, hey, this person is also a human. This person also has family. This person also has children. This person also has, their interest at stake.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's this war mentality that's like perpetuating across our politics.
Yeah. You were talking about unifiers, right? And I was thinking about this after Scott Soames was talking about, that he felt like everything was normal, I guess, right? And I'm thinking about it. What was going on then that's not going on now, and even in the 2000s. And it's in my opinion that people they want an enemy, basically, right? And obviously during that time period, it was a Cold War. We had an enemy, and there was a lot of fear going on. So we stuck together. And we're like, okay, if we're gonna get past this, we need to band together. Cold War ends, and then we get into 90s, 2000s, and it's like, okay, Middle East is the enemy, and we still semi stick together, right? 9/11 happened, stick together, and now you think about it, we don't really have an enemy, and it's kind of inverting on us because I think what happens in human nature, this is how people's brains work. If something isn't going on, if there's no noise happening, you find the noise, you create the noise, right? Like if you think about it, just like for example, middle-aged women that don't work. What do they always do? They complain about the menial things, the small things that don't even matter in life, right? Because they don't have a whole lot going on. And I feel like that's kind of what's happening right now. Would you agree?
I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you just said. Those unifiers that we used to have, you mentioned a couple of them. There's the Cold War, the experience of 9/11. When those things happen, it triggers this effort for us to band together. You know, because now that, like you said, there's a common enemy, and there have those. And you're right. That's one of the things I think about when I say the unifiers are disappearing. I think about that. I think about people who had served in the military, right? So people who put country over party, they really believe in American democracy. Yeah. They will sacrifice their lives to support it. The enrollment in the U.S. military is really declined dramatically. There's fewer and fewer people who are, one, enrolling in it, and two, that you see represented in Congress. It used to be a majority of members of Congress had served in the military. Now it's just a small minority. So they don't have that compulsion to national service. So that unifier is going away. When you think about people who have served in World War I and World War II, who realize what happens when democracies are threatened globally. You know, like you see a Hitler rise to power, and we're like, oh hell no, we all have to get together, world, and stop this scourge. I mean, there was over 14 million people who served in the United States who were in World War II. There's fewer than 100,000 of them who are still alive today, right? So it's the kind of thing where we're just not exposed to people who have that country over party mentality. The common enemy kind of goes away. And then, like you said, then what do we turn to? Well, it's very easy to find people that you disagree with because another unifier for us used to be something called the public square. And by that I mean, I was a kid who would go to the mall, right, and hang out at the mall. And this was in the 80s. And who's at the mall? Everybody's at the mall. It's a common space. It's where you'd go to maybe find a girlfriend or hang out with your friends, or you don't have a place to be. You just spend time there. Now people don't go to malls. Where else would you go? You go to the movies. People don't go to the movies now. They do, but in far fewer numbers because you got Netflix and you got Hulu and you got HBO Max and and people used to go to restaurants a lot more than they do now. But now you got Grubhub and you got DoorDash and you got Uber Eats. So why go out? And people used to go to concerts a lot more. Well, now I got YouTube, I got Periscope, we got all these other tools that we can watch concerts at. So I'll just stay up. So basically, all these things that you can just think about 50 more off the top of your heads. Yeah. But people are happy to stay home and not congregate with people that they don't know. But the danger of that really is human beings we are an animal species that is designed to be with one another. We're a social species. Yeah. We're not like the Mojave Desert tortoise where you'll find one every square mile. They're meant to live in isolation. No, we're meant to be together. So part of us, our biology is saying, hey, let's get together. But our social structures and our society is saying, stay home, don't be together. So what do? We bridge that gap by finding people who are easy for us to attract. And that means people that it's low effort connections. So this is people that we might find online who kind of think like us, our neighbors who kind of think like us. And so we end up moving into neighborhoods where people kind of think like us and finding digital communities of people where they kind of think like. So it's less challenging because we have never developed those kind of skills of navigating all this difference. And because of that, we're becoming increasingly isolated from one another as human beings. We have epidemic levels of loneliness, right? You think of the average male. The average male 20 years ago used to have 5+ good friends. Right now, 1 out of 5 men say they don't have any friends. And
it's a tragedy, yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it's of our own construction because that all the unifiers, back to your point, the unifiers are going away. And yet we're social animals. So what do?
Yeah, we invert.
This is really prevalent amongst Gen Z men, like our age demographic.
It's huge.
There is I would say, an epidemic of loneliness. Like you see this in when a lot of like guys our age go to extreme figures for advice. Like they go to online, like celebrities. Like they're not credentialed. They're just people who talk for a living. They go to them for their relationship advice, life advice. Yeah. And I think it's because a lot of Americans, like you said, are like those tortoises. Like, we're living like that. Yeah. Because I was in Europe 2 years ago. I was in France, and I went to a park. Guess what they were doing at the park?
On their phone?
No. In France, they were playing board games.
Oh, really?
They were playing tennis. This is on the weekend. There was a lot of them tended to be older people, which I understand. Like the younger people are not so much doing that, but the park was filled with people playing like board games, laughing and having an amazing time. And I was like, "What is this? I never see this in my hometown in Los Angeles. Yeah, I don't see this in Cerritos." And I think, going back to your point, it's about the community. We like when you don't interact together as a community, psychologically, you're not seeing people in person. Yeah. You're just seeing them as like characters. Yes. What's that to separate them from the movie show or the TV show that you see? They're just characters. They're just anime figures. Are they really real? And I think that dehumanizes your perception of the other person. It dehumanizes them. That's why it's easier to hate them, easier to view them as the enemy, as you said, in a war. It's crazy, man.
It's crazy.
Like, yeah. So 2 years ago, I keep giving examples 2 years ago. I think I peaked in 2 years ago in 2022.
It's the good old days.
The good old days. Back in my time, back in 2022, there was, Frank Luntz, right?
Sure.
The pollster. Yeah. Frank Luntz, he's a very like conservative, very well-respected pollster. Okay. And he invited USC students, just students, not just from USC, I think from other campuses as well, but majority from USC to his house. And I thought it was just going to be a dinner. and one of my actually coworkers, Gabe. You remember Gabe? He
Oh,
used to
sure,
work
yeah,
there,
yeah.
and he was like, "I'm going to this dinner thing. You want to come?" And I was like, "Sure." I go there. Turns out to be it was a taping for a Dr. Phil show. It was a Dr. Phil podcast that was supposed to examine political polarization. And I was fasting that day, so I have not eaten any food or water. And they're recording, so I can't do anything. So I'm like fasting, like basically
Yeah.
really hungry. And they're talking about politics and how crazy it is. So like I'm losing my mind. But the moral of the story is Dr. Phil basically examined the Democrats and the Republicans on campus. And he was trying to understand, why is there polarization? Why are students on college campuses divided? And he made us do some exercises to be less divided. So we did this thing
Dr.
called
Phil?
Dr. Phil, like literally Dr. Phil. The Dr. Phil's there with Frank Luntz.
Yeah.
And I didn't know any of this was going to happen. So I'm just there. And I'm politically independent. Like they asked
Yeah.
us to separate. So I was sat on the extreme like corner because I was independent. But he made everybody in the room stand up, look each other in the eye, and not say a single word for 2 minutes. This was part one. So he called it the standing triad or dyad. He had like a term for it. So they just looked at each other, not saying a single word, and just that was the first step. The second step was person A taps the person B on the shoulder and says, "I trust you, I don't trust you, I don't care, or I don't know the answer to this question." And then the person B does the same thing.
Yeah.
And most of the people said, "I trust you." Most of the people said, "I trust you." Second exercise was, now he started saying more and more words in Dr. Phil's voice. He was like, "Now let's, like see the other person as a human." And then the third step was, now imagine this person waking up this morning and he realizes his father passed away. Is this person lonely? Is this person experiencing depression?
Yeah.
Is this person having financial difficulty? And then I heard a lot more "I trust you" than the previous, because you got to talk.
Yeah.
My point is, and I actually listened to the video recording before this podcast to see, just to refresh my memory, and I most of the kids just felt you could see it. They were happier. Before it was very tense because they were like pinpointing, "Oh, it's this guy's fault, it's that guy's fault." But after the simple exercise of looking the other person in the eyes, they just felt more at ease. Like that was what broke the ice. Not Frank Luntz asking those small talk questions or Dr. Phil. It was just a simple exercise of looking the other person in the eyes, and they're like, "It's okay. This guy's human. He doesn't hate you.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to go after your family." Like I just think that was profound.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. I mean, think about it, and I think every family, right? You have people that have opposing political views, and you still view them as a human. Maybe you're like, I don't like you, I don't like the way you think, but you still care for them because you know what's going on in their lives. But if you humanize people like that, yeah, it's huge.
But a lot of families don't talk about politics.
No.
At the dinner table, a lot of them don't. Like they don't. At least in some of my like not immediate family,
Yeah.
but like distant family, we'd rather not talk about
Oh, with
politics. 'Cause
distant family.
Yeah, like distant family. We'd rather not talk about politics.
I think that's a more traditional view. Yeah.
What do you think of this?
Is
Because
it
I think it's a good thing to talk about politics at the dinner table. Like
know,
it's not something a bad thing.
If
is
you
it?
want to get good at anything, you got to practice it, and you got to do
Yeah.
it again and again and again. So if you want to be good at talking with your family about things that matter, what's going on in the world, current events, global politics, who you support for this or that candidate, what do you think about gun control, what's going on with global climate change? If you want to get good at any of that, you got to practice. And most of us have been taught never talk about religion and politics. And guess what? Two things we're terrible at talking about: religion and politics, right? So yeah, it depends on your goals. And for me, I would always much rather talk to people about whatever, because I want that connection. I want that feeling of looking in the person's eye and like, I trust you. I want to be able to talk about anything with anybody, right? And take away all of the artifice and all of the animosity and take all of that away, and let's just connect. There's things that you are so passionate about and that you're so passionate about, and I don't know anything about.
Right.
And I would love to learn that from you. Like, what do you really care? Oh, that's so interesting. And it's an opportunity to learn and be curious. And everybody has that. We can all learn from each other in those ways. But sometimes you just add this filter, and it's like putting on these goggles that make the other person look like this horrible, terrible person.
Yeah.
You're like, no, that is not reality. It is a distortion of our common humanity. But that distortion is so powerful because it is reinforced every day in so much of our lives that it is hard to wipe all that crud away from our vision.
Yeah.
So this, to your point, like we know the unifiers are shrinking, and we can do what we can to come together as people, like those French folks in the park. But the other thing we got to be mindful of is what's trying to divide us and why, and what can we do about that side of the equation.
That's a great question. That's a great question. I think people are, right now at least in the podcast world, I think it's a question that's becoming more and more prevalent, and bigger people are talking about this, and people start realizing, hey, maybe there's an agenda, maybe something's happening. But to what we can do, I think your point on curiosity. People, they're just not as curious, I feel. Like I talk to people, and I'm talking about traveling or whatever, and they're just like no interest. And it's like, why aren't you interested? Like, you don't want to see the world. Like, you don't want to go to that new restaurant. You don't want to, talk to that person you've never talked to. Like, just like your point, right? Naturally, we want to talk to people, but it feels they want to talk to people that they're comfortable with, or do things that they're comfortable with, right? Instead of jumping out of that comfort zone. I told you this one before, but everything that's worth living for is on the other side of fear, right? And so, in a way, it's like they're fearing that new situation, or that new confrontation that can come about, meeting someone new or traveling somewhere different, or, you know what I'm saying?
That's a great quote from Joseph Campbell. It said, the treasure you seek is in the cave you fear to enter. And so if you can build up the courage to challenge yourself to do the things that you're afraid of, that's where you'll gain the greatest rewards in life. And you're right about curiosity. Oh my gosh. And sometimes the things, the way I think about curiosity is, I want to be curious about the thing that you care about, because you might not know to ask me, what's it like to grow up in a war zone? I can tell you about that because I have that life experience, but you would never think to ask that. But in a conversation, it might come out, and then you'll get curious to ask about it. So in a conversation, I try to get people to talk about the things that they're really interested in. And then you guys are pros at this. Who am I talking to? But you're pros at this. No. But the idea is that you get people to talk about what it is that they are interested in, and then it starts to come out. And this is what I learned, guys, professionally. So if I can, I'll give you a 1-minute detour.
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay, so my 1-minute detour is, you mentioned that I was CEO of procon.org. I did that for 14 years. And that organization does pro and con research on about 80 different controversial issues. My daily audience was about 250,000 people a day that are coming to the site to learn about medical marijuana. Should my mom smoke pot to help her glaucoma? It was about euthanasia. Where can I go to end my life? What are the rules in Oregon? How's it different than California versus Washington versus Switzerland?
Wow.
It's about should felons be allowed to vote after they're released from prison? What are the rules in the different states? What are the prison populations? What's the rates of incarceration different? So you name it, animal testing, school uniforms, banning pit bulls, on and on and on. All these issues.
Bulls?
That was one of them. That was important to some people. But the point is that what I learned is from doing all that. So we reached over 300 million people over my 14 years there. We surveyed our audience and asked, how many of you changed your mind on an issue based on what you read? And I thought, no one's going to change their mind. These are tough issues. People come in with a strong, maybe 1%, maybe 5%. It was 5%. We're having a pizza party, y'all. After the first survey, it was 40%. Like, what the?
Wow.
What?
Wow.
And there's no way. Something is wrong. There's no way it's 40%. So we waited a year, did the same survey again, and it came back to 40%. We're like, what? How did 40% of people change their mind on these issues, like hotly contested issues? And this is what I learned. This is my gem of wisdom, is that what I learned is that people came to the website with an opinion already. And let's say it was the death penalty. They came in thinking the death penalty is wrong and should never exist. It should be banned. And so they saw those arguments on the site from the best sources, said in the best way, most current, more reasons, more arguments. And there it is, right there in the face. And they thought, that's exactly how I feel times 100. I wish I had that information on the tip of my tongue for these conversations. They felt heard. And when you feel heard, I've since learned this, when you feel heard, there's chemicals that are released in your brain that are the same chemicals as when you feel love. whoa, right?
That is a type of love, yeah.
So if you feel that way, when you feel hurt, like, wow, that's a powerful feeling. Love is a powerful feeling. If you feel that when you feel hurt, and then what happens, then your defensiveness goes down, right? And the level of trust in the source, now this pro-con, this level of trust in the source went up. And then for the first time perhaps ever, they looked at the other side and thought, well, maybe the death penalty is a good thing. And here's arguments in favor of the death penalty from great sources, not straw man sources, from the best sources. And those people who read that, maybe for the first time seeing an honest, tough to reckon with argument, had those aha moments. I never thought of it that way, huh? And it just forced some intellectual humility going, gosh. And it happened in private, right? Because they're interacting with a computer screen or their telephone, and there's not someone who's in their face. So what I learned from that is that listening, being able to gain someone's trust by listening, is so powerful. Because if you really want to change someone's mind, if that's your goal, the best way you can do it is just listen to them first, so that defensiveness comes down, the trust goes up, and then they can listen to opposing views. If you say it in a way that is respectful and presents good arguments and is not, antagonistic unnecessarily.
Yeah, that's great. Dale Carnegie talks a lot about that. How to win
right.
friends and influence people.
Yeah.
No, that's a great method to life. Listen first.
Listen first. There's an organization, by the way, called Listen First. It's over 700 organizations now across the country.
Oh, wow.
20 years ago, this was a fantasy, and now it's a reality. 700 organizations. Their mantra is listen first. And they are little community-based organizations all around the country. Some of them are big political organizations. Some are working in interfaith, connecting folks from different religions to have get-togethers. Some of them are dinner conversation based. They're doing convening so you can have dinner conversations with folks. Some of them are physical activity based. Just a few days ago, there was a rafting adventure where they got Democrats and Republicans to get in rafts in Western North Carolina, and they went down the river together.
Wow.
And at the beginning of it, they're like, "What are you doing in my boat, Trump, or wearing your MAGA hat?" And by the end of their adventure together, they're like, "Hey, we're all pulling in the same direction.
Yeah.
I might not like your politics, but I get who you are as a person, and you're not a bad person."
That's interesting you said that. So you said 20 years ago this would have been a fantasy doing this. But do you feel that there's more political polarization today than there was 20 years ago, even though there's more organizations out there?
Way more, yeah.
Right.
And I think it's, supply and demand, right? There is a tremendous demand for less toxicity in our politics. Because we're wired for connection, we don't want all this stuff in our way to connect as people. But there are systems in place that are dividing us. And that's like, for example, look at this process called gerrymandering, which you guys know so well, right? So as you carve up these congressional districts, and if you just Google gerrymandering map, these districts, they look crazy, right? It looks like an ink blot test. It makes no sense how these are carved out. But the logic of it is they're carved out to be strategically advantaged to one political party over another. And this happens in every state. There's gerrymanders. But the result of that is, out of 435 House districts in this country, do you know how many of them exist in a state where you don't know if it's the Democrat or the Republican who's going to win? Like, where's the magic of democracy? It's going to be that magic is happening in about 7% of all those districts. So it's
less than like 40. Wow.
That's right.
Yeah.
Quick math. Yes.
Yeah.
But it is a minority, right? Most of the time it's obvious it's going to be the Dem because of the gerrymandering. It's been carved up in a way we know Dem's going to win, or the opposite. We know the Republican's going to. We just don't know which one. So then the primaries matter a lot. And guess who votes in the primaries? The most motivated voters, most motivated, which are typically the most partisan.
Yes.
Right. So the most partisan voters show up at a time in primaries where the voting rate is usually less than 20%. Their voice matters disproportionately. They're electing extremes, the ideological extremes, into a general election. Then you get to the general election, and folks like us are scratching our heads going, "What? How did this happen? Is this as best as we can do? Why are these people so extreme? Don't we have better candidates than this?" And we don't, because people don't vote in the primaries and because of gerrymandering, which disproportionately. And that's just one example of a systemic factor causing our division that we need to be mindful of. this is not in our biology, but it is in our sociology.
You in previous interviews, you've talked about open primaries and how they can be one way to reduce polarization. Do you think though that maybe it's just the two-party system has reached a point where it's not healthy or productive anymore? Do you think having more than two political parties would reduce the polarization? Would that do anything, or that's not addressing the heart of the problem, in your opinion?
It's a tough question to answer, and a lot of people way
Yeah.
smarter than me have theorized on this. You could look at the Democratic and the Republican parties today and say it's not really two parties because there's such big factions within each
Mhm.
one. Within the Republican Party, there's a MAGA faction, there's the Freedom Party caucus, and there's different constituencies. And you look at the Democratic side, and you look at the Progressive caucus, and then you look at different factions, and you're like, okay, so that's in a way it's more splintered than
Yeah.
uniform within it.
Mhm.
But when it's time to close ranks, they do. So in that sense, they can be
Right.
mobilized. Then I think about when I look in my local elections, how many times do you see a Constitution Party or Libertarian Party or Green Party candidate? They're not always there, right? Sometimes you'll see a DNR and then who the heck are these other people, right? So these third party candidates are not really competitive in these races where they could be, because typically the third party strategy is they are grass tops. They're going to parachute in some dynamic person onto a national campaign and say, I'm running for president and I'm a famous person and I'm going to get a lot of media attention and I'm going to run for office at a presidential level. And there's not a lot of ground support for them, right? Because the parties at a local level are basically non-existent, right? They're not on the ballot in many states. So really it's tough for them to get traction because in their communities, there's not a lot of support. There's not a lot of community support for these third parties. But at a national level, they can occasionally be a charismatic enough figure like a Ross Perot or Jill Steiner or Ralph Nader to where you can get 3, 4, 5, or even double-digit percentage, Bobby Kennedy Jr., right, to get significant attention. And is it healthy for democracy to have more perspectives? In my opinion, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, we need that. We need the diversity of opinion in order to keep things strong and vibrant.
If Jill Stein was there, she would say Democrats and Republicans spend a lot of money keeping, Green Party candidates off the ballots. Like this is, at least nationally, they're doing this in states. They're both sides are spending a lot of money, a lot of resources legally to keep Jill Stein off the ballots in states. Like this is actively happening. They did the same thing with Robert F. Kennedy as well. You are right though, I think, in terms of if third party if third parties can figure out a way to mobilize voters on a grassroots level, then it's a completely different picture. Because then truly you can have more than just the duopoly that we have between Democrats and Republicans. I do think it'll help because right now it's either you're on this side or the other. It's black and white. But when there's different colors, right, like purple, orange, I don't know if the identity part of it becomes so focal because there's so many options.
Well, you look in the state of your point is well taken. I mean, you look in the state of California, the number one party in terms of registrants is the Democrat Party. Number two is decline to state, right? So the no party preference, and increasingly for Gen Z, increasingly identify with no party affiliation. So they don't feel connected to the party. They tend to vote one way or the other. They tend to vote either as Republicans or as Democrats, but they don't identify with the parties in these ways. So you can argue that the parties are kind of out of touch in that sense. Gen Z increasingly leans liberal towards the Democratic Party. There are certain issues that are top of the list important for them. Economy crosses all generations, but for Gen Z, number 2 and 3, climate change, gun violence, those are hugely important topics. If you look at other generations, those are not the top 2 and 3 topics. They barely make it in the top 10, right? So for young people's voice to really be amplified, you're like, hey guys, vote, show up, turn out, because no one's going to focus on those issues unless you do.
You know what's not concerning in a way, it's interesting. There's a big divide in Gen Z. So Gen Z males tend to be more Republican, and Gen Z women tend to be more Democratic. There's like a huge divide. The polling shows. I was looking at some polls and I was like, wow, like it's
really
Gen Z men like in the ages of 18 to 26, 25, increasingly to the right. Gen Z women increasingly to the left. And I think it goes back to what we discussed a little bit, is the issue of the young men crisis in America. Like, a lot of men feel that they're not being heard. And a lot of, like, political commentators are opining on why that is, but I think it's because of the digitization of our world. I think it's because increasingly, if you look at YouTube, right, what's the audience? It's male. I think honestly, like, it's probably 80 to 90% male
On YouTube?
on YouTube, at least. Like,
No.
in terms of people that are consuming political content, like, look at Jordan Peterson's audience,
Yeah.
90%
Oh,
male.
male, yeah.
Andrew Tate's 90% male. I'm talking, like, specifically like political commentary,
Yeah.
or like these, like, social commentators, I would say, are
Okay.
increasingly.
It's because they're filling the bubble. Like, Jordan Peterson is filling that bubble.
So what
of,
is the
of
bubble?
like-minded.
That's the thing.
So my question is, this young men crisis you're saying is feeding into the Republican Party, right? What's the answer for the girls, and why are they increasingly becoming liberal?
I don't know. I think
Right.
it's the same thing you could say for that
There-
side as well.
That's my
Yeah.
point. There's something that's going on that we're not aware of, right? But what we do know for sure is that on social media, the algorithm is feeding what your already interest is, right? Instead of showing you opposing viewpoints, and instead of
Yeah.
showing you, hey, this person does this actually. Instead, if you're watching gym content, your entire shorts on YouTube are going to be
Just
gym
gym,
content.
Yeah.
And when it's not gym, it's going to be like-minded stuff like,
Yeah.
you're a man, you're strong, you can do it. You know what I'm saying?
Sure,
It's
sure.
not it's not climate change. It's not talking about gun violence. It's talking about pro-gun. You're going to go out there and shoot them, and stuff like that. So there isn't a lot of discourse even in social media or the tech world, right?
I don't think it's the tech company's fault. I don't think they're the only entity to blame.
But they're
it's up to
you're right.
our individuals as well. Because if you
100%.
keep watching that gym video,
Yeah.
like, come on, like, you're gonna get what you asked for,
But
essentially.
when you go on shorts, how do you find other videos? You
through
know what
the
I'm saying?
feed, yeah, through the For You page,
No, but you won't find other, because the For You page
is based on your algorithm.
exactly
Yeah.
adapts to you.
Yeah.
And so if you continuously watch the stuff, it becomes deeper and deeper and deeper into the algorithm. Like, this is the only thing the guy likes.
Yeah, it takes a lot of, like,
Yeah.
awareness to fight that algorithm.
Y-
You have
yeah.
to have a lot of awareness.
Yeah,
You
the-
do.
100%.
The way I see it is, you're saying a little bit of, you're saying shame on them because the algorithms are forcing us into these ideological silos, and that's all we see. That's all we're fed. And it'd be kind of like, you see the food pyramid. It would be like just eating this narrow band of it. Like, I'm only going to eat French fries, and we all know that that is a very unhealthy diet.
Right.
But that's all we're getting. And so you're saying, not shame on them, shame on you, consumer. You have fingers, you got thumbs, you can pick whatever you want from that feed. You can go and find other things that could be of interest to you. And the way I see it, it's both of those things are absolutely
Right,
true.
yeah.
Shame on you and shame on them. But really, shame on them too, right? Shame on them too, because they are profiting from this sort of this kind of division. They are creating headlines that are curated in ways that are intended to be like the car chase. It's like that dopamine. It's like the outrage. They're creating these likes to where we feel like we have no social validation unless there's a certain number of likes for the content that we're posting, certain kind of audience, and we feel rejection if we don't have that. It's this way of wanting to connect with human beings has been digitized.
Yeah.
And it is not a reflection of who we are. It is a funhouse mirror, complete distortion. But people are profiting heavily from that. We feel so connected to our social media accounts. It is like an extension of us, but it is not us. It is a corporation that has allowed us to create all this user-generated content so they can sell more advertising on these systems, even though it feels like this is our space, and it's not. So all that's to say, from the way I see it, is absolute shame on them, and the consequence of what they're doing is not just we're not able to hold hands and have kumbaya moments. The consequence of what they're doing is we have a loneliness epidemic in this country. The United Kingdom has a minister of loneliness. The U.S. Surgeon General has declared loneliness to be a health epidemic. It's that rates of anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation, especially for young girls, ever since 2014, when these phones and social media became right here in our pockets, have gone off the charts. And it is not just a correlation, it has been proven to be a causation. The phones and these social media accounts are driving us apart from each other, despite what they are advertising. Like, oh, it's a great tool. You can connect with friends. But you guys asked me to be here in person because we all know it is different to be together than to be together digitally, right? And so, and we are spending less and less time as human beings, especially as Americans, spending less and less time with each other physically than we are digitally. And the consequence of that is this acceleration of loneliness, this acceleration of disconnectedness, which leads to anxiety and depression and suicide. So all these things, and you know how you fix it? Turn the damn phone off, right? Put it away, spend less time on it. Go and connect with friends, spend time with friends, go play together, do stuff together, go into the public square and be together, because that's what our biology is wired to do. And that's where we find our greatest happiness. When you think about the times where you were happiest in your life, was it when you were on a phone or was it when you were with other people? Right. And so we just got to be mindful of those things.
Do you know what's crazy? I think kids growing up these days will probably have the memories of where they saw this reel. Like, I was here sitting by this cafe.
You think so?
Probably. Like, they'll recall the moments where they saw specific videos. You know, like, I think that it's sad, but I think that might happen. But, you know, going back to your point about shame on the companies, I would agree with you more so that it is more shame on them in the way they've constructed things algorithmically. Like, because if you look at the way Instagram works, right, there's a like feature and then you can comment. You could see people's, now they've like made it so you can't see the total number of likes. Like, you can hide the like count. But still, like, you know, if you hide likes on your post, it basically means it didn't get a lot of likes. So you don't want people to see how many likes you see. So even the fixes they're trying to do to this doesn't really make sense. If you go on YouTube, you can like something and dislike something. You can comment something. And I would say shame on the companies, more so to your point, because they've figured out a way to psychologically foster addiction amongst people. The way they've constructed these things, they are to blame. But in terms of the content itself, because people are creating the content, it's not like YouTube is sponsoring, you know, like specific thought makers. Maybe they unintentionally do elevate some voices, but they don't have like content creators that are like, you know, that they pay to
they're not manually fixing it.
Like, you know, so that's why I think consumers are to blame in terms of what content they consume, but the system is in a way against them. If you build a system where, you know, like, you can like something and dislike something, you're already putting each other in that polar opposites. Either you like this or you don't like this. And it's so easy. You literally just go like this. It takes less than a second to like something or not like something. That I think is, you could have a conversation about the ethics of that, because that is completely up to the corporation to fix and address.
If I'm a content creator and I know, I'm like, okay, what do I want to create? If I want to get into this, right? What do I want to create? And I know, and I'm going on all these videos, and these guys are getting so many likes. Oh, I started posting about this, and somebody's saying this. I posted about this, and all of a sudden, 1 month later, I have 20,000 followers. You're like, okay, I kind of want to do that, right? And so you naturally fall into the bubble, right? Just like you were saying earlier. Just it's the path that's less traveled. It's easier. And so human nature naturally is going to make people like fall into this ideation and then keep going, right? And what these corporations are doing, they're literally feeding that human nature, right? Which I think is completely against goodwill, because I think a good human, like you said, should be saying, hey, we should have discourse. Hey, look at this. Hey, look at that. And another thing, I've been debating myself on this, the comment feature. I don't know if it's even necessary at all. I don't know if it helps anything. I don't think it does, because half the time when you're scrolling on Instagram, how many times are you looking at the comments?
A lot,
because you want to see what people say.
You know, there's one of my friends, he posts this on his Instagram story. He was like, I literally just go on Instagram now
for the comments. Yeah,
I don't even go for the comments.
I've seen reels that literally say that. It's crazy. It's because you want to see the discourse. If it's a video and it's like, that video probably should have been posted because they're making fun of a fat person or they're making fun of a homeless person.
Yeah.
You want to see what other people are saying, right? Because you don't want to think it yourself without other people agreeing with you.
That validation.
Validation. Exactly.
I don't think disabling the comment section would do much. I think it's fine, because at least you're giving people the opportunity to comment. It's free speech.
Yeah,
Because
it's
that would
free
just
speech.
create all sorts of issues.
But
I don't like the likes.
that's
just
worse to you.
the dislike and the like, putting people on this like polar opposite. Even like follower counts.
Yeah.
People in LA, especially the kids that I meet,
Mhm.
influencers or wannabes,
They care.
they identify their self-worth with their follower count. They identify themselves with,
Yeah.
okay, I am not a good person right now because I have 5,000 followers. Amy has 10,000 followers. She's a
Yeah.
better person than me. That is, to
How many
me,
times have you told somebody that?
never. I would never tell somebody that. But that is, I don't know how to fix that, but that
Yeah.
is definitely, like, I would say, an unethical way to wire people's brains.
Yeah,
across
for sure.
generations. Yeah, I don't know how to
Yeah.
fix that though. Do you have any ideas?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of work that has been done in that specific area.
Yeah.
So there's people who argue that in order to fix social media, you need content curation. You need content editors. So basically, you have an army of people who are looking at all the posts and are saying appropriate, inappropriate, less of this, more of this. I don't buy that.
I agree with you.
You know,
It's
there's
BS.
another way to do it, which is design focused and saying that some of the features, like you're saying, the likes, the button up or button down, how much space do you have to write a comment? Do you have 20 characters or do you have 2,000 characters? Can you only say something short and brief, or can you really give an explanation for it? And what kinds of things kind of get elevated algorithmically? If you can adjust those kinds of things, you can end up with a better content on the platforms and and improve the conversation. And at USC, our alma mater, right? We can say the Neely Institute for Ethical Leadership. They have a whole guide of suggested design changes for social media companies to adopt, and they're getting legislators to then pass laws in certain states to say we need you to if that product is going to exist in our state, it has to adhere to these standards. So there's a way to force social media companies to do it legislatively or through design encouragement. But ultimately, they don't. The reason they're not doing it is because if you do less doom scrolling on your phone, then you're spending less time and there's less revenue, right? So, and they're thinking about bottom lines, and their bottom lines, I mean, they're some of the largest, the five largest companies on the Fortune 500. I mean, 3 of them are tech companies who rely on us doom scrolling, right?
Yeah.
So we have to be mindful of that. Saying they are. You use the word. I think they're made them psychologically addictive. So completely intentionally and with a great degree of sophistication, they're able to manipulate our human emotions in a way to where we are literally addicted to our phones.
Yeah. What's annoying is when these like social media CEOs are summoned to Congress to testify, they act like, oh, well, what? The like feature did that? Like, come on, dude. Mark, you know what you were doing with that? Don't act like so innocent.
Oh, calling somebody out here?
Well, yeah, I will. Like, you know, it's I don't think they know what they're doing when they invent those features. I think that within law specifically, I think the next big it's already started, but I think the next big battle within the sphere of law is going to be digital regulation of companies. Because if you look at a corporation, you have a small business, you have certain regulations that you have to abide by. You just do, right? You can't. There's nothing you can do about it. It's the law. Similarly, I think the next it's already happening, is going to be how do you digitally regulate tech companies?
Yeah.
Like there's going to be like a whole field dedicated just to this. And there have to be regulations because any other corporation has to go through regulations as well. Why are digital companies immune from that? That to me doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that definitely doesn't make sense. I think I have a hard time with that because the thing is, if you impose more regulations, right, now you're limiting people's freedom to do things.
You need a balance, yeah.
You need a balance, but it's like, do you know what the balance is?
No,
but do you know what the balance
know,
is? No, that's the problem.
But
no,
you could find that balance. You know, you could.
I disagree, bro. Because the thing is, everyone thinks about things differently, right?
Yeah.
So your balance is different than my balance.
Yes.
Russell's balance is different than his balance, and it goes so on, right? So it's like, where does that balance come out? And eventually, it becomes a polar opposite because you guys are disagreeing so much and it's butting heads so much that even when I think it becomes like this. This middle ground. There's a book. It's called Never Split the Difference. And so this guy, his book is about negotiation. But he says that you never split the difference because when you split the difference, it eventually becomes hotter and hotter water, basically. So if he wins and you lose, that means they're going to build resentment against you, basically, right? And so when do you see where I'm getting at here?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I don't see it as a negotiation.
It is, though.
I just see it as a communal thing. That's why I think even like we're so polarized when we think about
Yeah.
these issues, we think about one side or the other side. It doesn't need to be. It can just be the communal aspect of it. You know, like let's think
Yeah.
of it as a
I wish it was like that. Yeah.
I think that like that's hopefully we'll get to a point where we think of problems as a community as opposed to us versus them. You know.
I think a lot of the regulation stuff, but people worry about what it could lead to. And I think that's completely fair to worry about that stuff. But there's other things that we're like, look, we know that the rate of anxiety, depression, and suicide for teenage girls is on the rise. It is directly caused by their use of social media. The higher the use, the greater the likelihood of these problems occurring. So what can we do about that? This is our reality. This is not a theory. This is not slippery slope. This is this is right now problem. What are we going to do? And those things can be fixed by doing things like, can you do age verification on your systems? Can you make sure that if your policy says you can't create an account unless you're 13 years old, then what's to stop somebody from a 10-year-old from saying, yeah, I'm 13 and creating an account? Can you have some kind of standard for that? And can you have some kind of way to where the activity can be monitored by an adult, by a guardian, so that they can see what's going on with the child's social media account up to, say, age 16, right? When maybe they don't want the parental interference. But there's certain things that can be done that are just not done because those companies are not, no one is forcing their hand. So we can say, act because it's the right thing to do. And even assuming that they had good intentions in the beginning and they have since discovered, oh my gosh, unintended consequence. This is a really bad outcome. We got to fix this. Well, then fix it. Fix it now. And if you don't fix it now, then I think it's fair for government to come along and say, you've had every opportunity. You know it's a problem. You haven't fixed it. So we're going to force your hand and do this thing that nobody wants, which is overregulate.
I think it's also... social media companies are one aspect, but I also think parents play a big role. Like somebody told me this, and I don't know if this is like completely accurate, but guess how much time parents spent with their kids these days, on average?
Bro, parents are more laissez-faire than ever before.
15 minutes
a day.
A day is the average time spent with a parent and his or her child.
It's insane.
15 minutes. How are you going to build that relationship with them that makes them, again, like you said, trust? Because I think trust is at the heart of all the issues that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, how are you going to lead by example?
They're not thinking about these things. They're thinking about right now, I'm working and this kid is annoying me. How do I get rid of them? Give them an iPad.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, they're also literally, I see, people around me, older people that have children, and they're on their phones.
Yeah.
Like, they're scrolling as well.
Yeah.
So you can't, the kid is going to see
what they're doing.
Yeah,
lead by example.
You have to lead by example.
That's the problem.
That's right. No, it's so true. Don't you agree? Like, it's not what I say, it's what I do. And kids follow what their parents do.
You're a parent. How do you monitor or control your kids' social media?
I mean, to some degree, you can't.
Right.
They're going to, no matter how crafty you as a parent think you are, your kid will outsmart you every time. They'll figure out ways to get all around that. So you just try to give them a good moral compass and then... pray. But you got to give them a good moral compass. And I think ultimately as parents, so the number one thing is that kid needs to feel like they can trust their parents and their parent loves them over everything else. You can give specific lessons on specific topics and, look both ways and wear a sweater and, all whatever life lessons you want to give. But ultimately, if that kid feels loved, that's the moral compass that they need, right? And observing your behavior is like you are a person who gives love and gives comfort to others. That's the kind of person I want to be. And all the rest of that stuff will figure itself out. And kids need to have time to screw up and make mistakes and learn from mistakes and climb up this slide and fall off the slide and hurt themselves and think, you know what, I'm not going to do that again, or make a mistake and learn from that. And unless we give young people the freedom to do those kinds of things, and we don't overparent, overregulate, helicopter parent. I'll let you walk to school, but I'll be 20 paces behind watching every step. Like, unless you let kids do that kind of stuff, then they're not going to learn how to do those things on their own.
Yeah.
You know, and we can't expect them to. I feel that same way about being a citizen in today's world. It is increasingly difficult to be an informed consumer of information because you didn't grow up saying, how do I sift information out of 3,000 sources of information that's coming at me 24/7 through my phone that I'm addicted to? Like, how do I do that? There's no class in school about that, right?
Yeah.
So
It's a new thing.
it's a new thing, right? In my generation, we had 3 channels and they're all pretty much the same and they're all pretty good, right? So if I wanted to find out the news, it was easy. And now, like, it's not fair to hold Gen Z responsible and saying, like, you're not informed on issues. You have all the care motivations. You volunteer at higher rates than any other demographic, right? 4 out of 5 members of Gen Z believe that they can make the world a better place. 2 out of 5 of them think that they don't have the tools to do so. And how many of them vote? About 20% of Gen Z's vote. So you have all this compassion, empathy, and motivation to change, but don't feel like the structures in our society are encouraging or rewarding your participation. And so you have to push back against that. Like, that's why I think about systems. So much of how I see the world, it boils down to really that, like, shame on the people who are creating the systems that are disincentivizing all the good behaviors. Yeah, sure, shame on us too. Like, I can be a better digital citizen. I can let my kid have more freedom. There's things we can do interpersonally, and there's things we can do intrapersonally. But systems are really what's making these changes happen at scale. And to your question about polarization and its rise over time, it's the systems that are driving that, because the interpersonal stuff is not happening like that at scale. It's the systems that are changing. And because they went one way, they can go the other way too, right? And so it's just a matter of designing, and that's not easy to do, but we know what they are. We know social media, we know search engine algorithms, we know it's the shrinking public square, we know it's our K-12 educational system and how 5 cents of every dollar that are going towards civics education, and used to be like, in social studies classes are on decline. Kids are not talking about issues in the classroom, and then they graduate and they don't know how to vote. They don't know how to think on issues, right? So it's these systems, and the more we're aware of what those kinds of problems are, we can put our attention to those things. But I also think that doesn't take the blame off of us. There's so much we can do as individuals, and I applaud you for this show, because you are intentionally bringing people and disagreeing with them in civil ways and respectfully, and you don't have to agree with them. But the idea is you are doing something interpersonally. You are affecting the change within your communities, within the sound of your voice. You are open. You have intellectual humility. You're open to change yourselves. You're willing to have personal change and growth. And that's in our control. Everybody's control every day. We make those choices every day. So what can I do within my heart and my mind? What can I do within my friend circle, family circle, work circle, community? What can I do? And then when you do those things, all right, let me think about these systems. What can we do about them?
Going back to your point about the loved aspect, I think people want to be loved, and we talked about this, but also heard. Because a lot of kids know that their parents love them, but they don't necessarily feel like their parents understand them or truly listen to them in a way that makes them feel heard. And I think beyond just the parental relationship, it goes back to if citizens, and especially Gen Z people, the statistic that you mentioned, a lot of Gen Z don't feel like they have the tools, is because I think they're not thinking that they're being heard by people in positions of power. So I think the challenge for leaders coming up is, how do you make people feel heard? And I think that can start by the point you just made is, in conversations, you should have intellectual humility. It's so important, because a lot of times we're talking about political ideas and viewing them as a debate. We're already going into the debate thinking, I'm right, this guy is wrong. How do I get them to think I'm also right? How do I be like, okay, listen, I was right, man. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's not a healthy way, because you should be having conversations. Now, in conversations, you share ideas. You see the intention behind every idea. When you do that, you can find productive solutions much more easily than a debate, because you see presidential debates these days. It's a he said this, he's wrong. She said this, she's right or wrong. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? It's not, you're not having a conversation. And more and more so, when people talk about politics, they view it as a debate. Like they're a presidential candidates talking about issues, and it doesn't have to be like that. Like they can be right even if they're Republican, or they can be right even if they're Democrat. It's okay. We're just trying to improve the democracy that we have, and we're forgetting that it's a umbrella. The umbrella that we live under is being attacked by us unintentionally. Like we don't even realize it.
Out of curiosity, for your generation, how many of 18 to 25-year-olds were voting?
The voting rate for young people has always been low. The
Always been low.
20% has been a norm for many, many years. That changed in 2018, 2020, and 2022 when it went from 20%, especially in 2018, it went up to about 25%. And it's a 5 percentage point difference. But when you think about
That's
it,
a lot of people.
it's a lot of people. So Gen Z, it's the second largest generation in American history, second only to millennials. So the numbers are there. If Gen Z wants its voice to be heard, boy, does it have a big throat, right? It can really make a huge change in the world. So just that 5 percentage point difference, it made it to where all these pundits who are saying there's a red tsunami that's going to come, and the House of Representatives is going to be Republican controlled, the Senate is going to be Republican controlled, and Democrats, you're in for a beatdown. And that did not happen. And it did not happen because Gen Z, just that 5 percentage point, that was the number one factor that drove, that changed the outcome of that election, was young people using their voice. And can you imagine if they voted instead of from 20 to 25%, but they actually matched millennials and boomers or Gen Xers, and they got up to that 40% mark? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You want to see change on climate change? Please get to 40%. You want change done? You are sick of having to do the duck and cover drills or the run, fight, hide drills in your schools. If you're sick of that, Gen Z, please vote. Please vote, because your voice is one of the loudest in the room and you are whispering.
So I've talked to some people and just about issues, right? And it's like, do you vote? And they're like, no. It's like, why not? And the reality is, a lot of people, they're just not informed. They just don't really know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Right. And so they know that gun violence is bad, but how do I become informed? Another thing, not even becoming informed, but when you're looking at the ballot and you're reading each one, a lot of times they try to trick you.
Oh, for sure.
They try to trick you. The yes means the no means the yes. And it's like, how do I become savvy enough to decipher what the true meaning is?
California propositions are notorious for this.
Oh, it's bad.
Yeah.
It's bad.
They do it intentionally.
Yeah. And that's not okay, right? That's not okay. But that, I think that ultimately falls onto
the voters.
To become informed, to learn how to speak properly or read properly or decipher what things mean, right? But with that said, how many people even are interested in these topics enough to become informed on it, right?
I mean, that's $1 million question right there. And it's so hard because people, they tune out. They tune out because they see how toxic these conversations are. It just is shouting matches and it's ugly and they don't want to be part of that. And so they just kind of tune out. They feel like their voice, it doesn't really matter. You know, they like this, the system is going to be fine. The world is going to be the way that it is. And it doesn't matter what I do. It's just, these things are going to persist. And if that's how a person thinks, they're absolutely right. You know, these are self-fulfilling prophecies. But when do people care? When it gets personal.
Right.
That's why you look at an issue like reproductive health and you're like, if a woman has had to have an abortion and knows what that feels like, she will have a probably pretty strong view on whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, right? Because she will have had that personal experience. If someone's child was injured in a school shooting, you bet they have a strong view on those issues and they will turn out to vote. So we have to think about what makes it personal. And it's hard to do that sometimes. We're like, local water district, I don't know how that affects me personally. Or a city council member, like, I don't know how that council member affects me personally. But the more you know, the more you realize they make a huge difference in our daily lives, and we're just not aware of it. And we don't realize the power that our votes have. In my district, I live in Torrance. In the district that I live in, the outcome of the city council race was determined by 9 votes, and it went from a candidate who I
Wow.
thought was awesome. She lost by 9 votes. And it wasn't just me. Like most people think that she's wildly qualified. The person who ended up in that position is someone who most people think is the worst. And he happened to win because most folks in my districts in Torrance, they did not show up to vote. And if they had reflected the actual will of the community, then it would have been a very different outcome. And you're like, 9 votes, that's it. You look at the 2000 presidential race,
Yeah.
and we were talking about 500 something votes that
In
made all the
Florida, yeah.
difference. And you know, like really, it came down to that. It could come down to that right now in these
Yes.
6, 7 battleground states. I mean, both candidates are within a margin of error of each
Mhm.
other. So it's one of those every vote counts, especially in those states. But even in our own state of California, every vote counts because even if you don't vote for the presidential, you don't care. There's 20 other things on the ballot. And to get informed on that stuff, because it is hard,
Yeah.
and I don't blame people like, I don't have time for this. I don't want to deal with this. The system was going to go on, and it doesn't matter what I think. It does matter what you think, and you should vote. And the way that you get informed quickly is go to a trusted, nonpartisan news source. And that means like your local NPR affiliates. You know, find their webpage. It could be KCRW, could be KCCC if you're here in LA, and they have voter guides.
Local newspapers.
Local
yeah.
newspapers, right? Or you find the local like ABC, CBS, NBC, that kind of mainstream news. Their voter guides for your local elections. They're pretty good, pretty good. So you can find other ones that are the League of Women Voters, nonpartisan. You know, there's good ones that are out there. You just find that, and it'll help you kind of figure out where you stand and vote on the things that you're sure about. And if you're not sure, don't vote on those things, but do vote and at least be part of the solution.
Another problem in that question for those people who say like, why does my vote even matter? People start caring about voting when election time comes. It's like, you know, your life doesn't start when the election happens. Your life is literally the days after the election ends, because are you politically active in that time period? And I think all of us, I'm not saying to be obsessed about politics, but should be aware of what's happening in our community. Because I think one of the biggest threats to democracy is political ignorance. The moment people start taking the right to vote for granted, it can be taken away by any leader who, you know, prize on that vulnerability. It's so easy to just take that away. If people don't care, they're like, okay, fine. They wouldn't even feel the difference because I never voted. I never went to the polling booth. I didn't know what it was like. But I'm curious, since we talked about curiosity on the podcast, you said you grew up in a war zone. What was that like?
Well, yeah, so I was born in Iran and moved to South Louisiana when I was 1 year old. And we lived there until I was about 7. And at age 7, the Shah of Iran was deposed. And my family, the Shah was perceived as a dictator. And so we thought, oh, dictator's gone. Let's go back and rebuild the country in a way that is more democratic and egalitarian. So moved back, like a lot of people did, moved back and wanted to be part of this exciting new forward-looking modern Iran. And by the way, Iran at that time, my mom would wear miniskirts and go to the clubs and dance to James Brown. And my dad had long hair and he liked whiskey sodas at the bar, right? It was that kind of an open society. But what happened is after the Shah was deposed, the Ayatollah came. He was in a prison in France. He got out of prison. He ended up coming back to Iran, and then he established himself as a theocrat and said, look, I'm back. We're going to establish Iran as a theocracy. It's going to be run by religious leaders. And he brought in the mullahs, and it's now the only theocracy in the world is run by largely uneducated men who believe a certain form of government is dominant. Now women not only can't wear skirts, they have to cover their hair in public, and if you don't, you can be beaten or jailed. Women are not allowed to ride a bicycle in Iran. But okay, back to your war zone question is during this period of rebuilding, the people who are the revolutionaries who helped to depose the Shah, those people then were being jailed and executed by the Ayatollah's minions because they were saying, thank you for getting the Shah out of here. Now we're in charge and you're done. We don't need you anymore. And so that happened to a lot of people. So there was all of this internal turmoil. All the revolutionaries were being jailed and killed. And concurrently, there's the taking of U.S. hostages. Now the U.S., which was a major ally, is now seeing Iran as a major threat. And concurrently, the government of Iraq under Saddam Hussein decides, hey, let's go attack our
Kuwait, yeah.
our neighbor here in Iran. And so that was the
Oh, you're
wars.
talking about before, okay.
Yeah. So all this happened in late 1979. All those three things happened. And so my experience of childhood when we had moved back thinking, yay, happy days are here again, finding out, no, not only are happy days not here, a war has just started. My relatives are being jailed. And at night, we'd have to turn off all the lights in the buildings in the house we were living in. All the neighbors had to do the same. Everyone had tape across their windows because the Iraqi planes would fly overhead and they would drop bombs where they would see lights, because the point was maximum carnage, right? They just wanted to kill as many people as possible. So if you see a lot of lights, large population center, bomb that. And that was the nature of warfare. So I remember hearing the planes, hiding in the basement. No lights. Like if your watch made a light, cover the watch. If your neighbor had a light on, you were a target. Hey neighbor, turn your effing light off. You're going to get us all killed. And it was that kind of tension, and day after day after day. And then you'd hear the bombs and you're like, I wonder where they got, this time. And then you'd find out, oh, they got this or that community. And that was the experience. And that's when my parents thought, what have we done? We were living in rural Louisiana, and, it has its own problems, but boy, did we end up in a worse scenario.
Yeah.
And so we had to get the hell out of there. And that's a whole nother process. I mean, we had to smuggle ourselves out of the country, hired basically a coyote to smuggle us into Turkey. And we lived in Turkey and tried to get back into the U.S. and went to the U.S. Embassy and said, hey, can we come back? And they're like, nope, remember those hostages? You're the bad guys now. You can't come back. And we're like, but we used to live there, and my dad had a job, and my mom had a job. She was a nurse. He's an architect. Nope, you're not allowed back in. And so we thought, maybe that was because the U.S. Embassy in Turkey. We moved to Bulgaria. We lived in Bulgaria for a few months, and tried the U.S. Embassy from there.
Wow.
And same thing. Nope. You're not on our good list anymore. You can't. So we had relatives in France. We moved to Paris and lived there for a few months. Same thing with the embassy. Couldn't get back in the U.S. And at this point, my family's thinking, well, we can't go back to the United States. We really, really want to, but we can't. We had come from Iran, but we cannot go back there. So what do we do? And we thought, I guess we'll go back to Turkey. It's at least close to Iran. And so we moved back to Turkey, and we tried one more time to get back in to the U.S., and that time it worked.
Oh, wow.
I remember jumping up and down on the bed of some crappy hotel that we were living in because they got the paper saying they were approved. And the reason why, and this is part of why I love America for all its flaws, but what a rural Baptist in that small town I grew up in Lafayette, he loved our family, and he was my dad's boss, and he spent 10 grand of his own money to hire an immigration attorney to help look into our case and file the paperwork and did all the things that got us in. And if it wasn't for this guy, my life would be so completely different. I'd be some street kid in Ankara, Turkey. But because of this guy, and every year around Christmas time, my dad calls Mr. Tolson, Jack. So if I see him crying on the phone, I know he's talking to Jack Tolson about this. So it's just, power of the goodness of other human beings when you invest that in someone else, and what a big difference you can make in another human being's life. And all that's to say, like, got out of that war zone, man. We got out of the what could have been a very different childhood, and we ended up back in rural Louisiana. So it's still where I grew up. But yeah, hell of a story, right?
That's amazing.
Wow. And he put in 10 grand back in the 80s, right?
In the 80s, yeah.
That's a lot of
money. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And, we come back to, super racism, right? They're like, Iranians, oh, you took hostages, oh, F you and your whole family and all that stuff. But boy, were we happy to deal with that,
right?
instead of getting
the actual,
bombed. Right.
100%.
Right.
This reminds me, I'm an immigrant as well. I came from Pakistan. So the moment we got our visa to come, it was a visit visa to come to America. But I come from a I don't know if I've shared this with you, but my community is the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. We're persecuted in Pakistan, so we can't vote under the constitution.
Wow.
So to come to America is impossible. But the day you're describing, I can imagine what that was like. Is the day I got my visa, I thought like I won the lottery. Like it's that hard to move to America. People don't realize like legal immigration in America incredibly tough. Like the system, the systems in place make it very hard for people living in countries like Pakistan to immigrate to America. So yeah, I'm totally with you. Like that day, you probably felt like the luckiest person in the world.
You know,
Yeah.
I feel that way. And so many immigrants who come to this country kind of have those dreams and aspirations. They're like, this is where you have the most freedom, the most liberty. You can be the kind of person you want to be. You want your kids to be better off anywhere in the world, get them into the United States. That's where they can be better off. And so the immigrant mentality when they come here is to build and grow and make things better. It's not to mooch and take. And, you know, it's not that at all. Like they're hard workers. And so it bothers me to hear the immigrant bashing, knowing that we're a nation of immigrants. We're a unique experiment in democracy, and we need that sort of innovation. We want the best of the world to come here and strengthen this whole system. And it's not any one ethnicity's country. It's all of our country. Yeah.
Literally, my story, 400 years ago, you go back, the white people who came here, the pilgrims, they had the same story as me. They were being religiously persecuted. They came here to seek religious freedom.
Right.
And America was literally started by the same concept, that same premise,
That's
religious
true.
freedom.
Good point. Yeah.
And, you know, we have a lot of faults. We talked about all those faults in our country,
we
this
have so many.
podcast. But the beauty of America is the liberties that we have and the promise of our diversity.
Yeah.
Like, we are a nation of a global immigration. There's people in America from every single corner of the world. And the test for us is, can we live happily together under the same roof? And I think the longevity of our democracy is an answer to that test. Will we prevail? I hope so. I pray so.
Yeah.
But if we don't take things like voting seriously, we might not be able to.
Right. It also reminds me, I used to, in college, I used to be a coyote for probably a dozen families.
Whoa.
Yeah. So I would bring them across. I would go into TJ.
He's making this. Stop. So this guy has started to make up stories because he fooled me and another podcast guest that he met Alex Jones. That Alex Jones took him to some dinner in
maybe
San
it happened.
Francisco.
I don't know.
No, it's ever since then he thinks he can fool all of us.
No, actually, I told this story. So I was with my girlfriend and her family, and her grandma was actually brought by a coyote, and so I told her, I was like, I actually used to be a coyote. I would go to TJ, and I created this story, and her dad was listening. He was like, what, really? When did this happen? And I went on for like 10 minutes, and at the end I was like, no, I'm just messing around.
Oh, man.
This guy, riffing.
Yeah. You caught it right away.
Yeah,
You could have
no, I
gone on
know.
for 10 minutes. I would still be buying it.
I'm
Yeah.
doing too much with these
I
guys.
do. I'm so
But
used to
this guy,
thinking
he falls for it sometimes.
Uh-huh.
once, I think, on
No,
documentary.
even recently.
On the podcast?
Yeah, on the podcast.
Interesting. All right. Well, this is the last time.
Caught hard.
Yeah. It's
What?
a good skill.
I just like to
It
laugh.
is. Any last things you want to say? Any last message? Anything you want to promote?
Well, I
Plug.
promote this USC Center for the Political Future. I mean, you guys are modeling civil discourse in our conversation here. That's what we try to do. We try to bring Dems and Republicans together so they can talk across issues and try to make progress on these things. We're also, as you know so well, trying to train and develop young people to go into politics or any kind of civic engagement, advocacy, working in nonprofits, just trying to commit to public service in some kind of way that's bigger than themselves. So all that's to say, we hope more and more young people who are considering colleges, and not everybody should, but for those who are considering college and you have an interest in politics, to consider the USC Center for the Political Future. And if you want to watch events, they're all available online and via Zoom. And then as the only thing to promote is the things we've all been discussing, that when we have those choices, do we react or do we respond? And there's a big difference. And sometimes I think the best advice I give somebody is just take a breath, just pause.
Yeah.
You know, it's usually that first thought is the wrong thought. The second thought, maybe don't use that second thought. Maybe go with the third thought. The
Yeah.
third thought is the right thought. And sometimes just taking a breath will allow your brain enough time to process or ask a question, buy yourself a little bit of time to where you're not reacting, because reacting comes from the animal emotional part of our brains, and our responses come from the part that that's the real us,
Yeah.
the one that we work so hard to develop, the one that we have nurtured over our whole lives, our real identity. So if you want that one to come out, just take a breath before you respond.
That's a good note. Logic over emotion.
Thank you, sir.
On that note,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you.